much for inviting me, and very interesting previous presentation. And I'm going to touch on flow as well. So it was very interesting to hear about your work. And from technology, I'm going to talk about something very, very analog now. So it's a little bit of contrast, to say the least. So just to tell you a little bit about why I'm here, my name's Julia Reeve, and before Christmas I was invited to come and do a Lego Serious Play workshop by Anshul and at Staffordshire, where we were looking at the idea of inclusive learning. And it seemed to me a really appropriate vehicle for looking at this topic. But within that session, we didn't really get the chance to discuss perhaps a little bit of the theory behind the method and why I find it such an inclusive tool. So hence, I'm here today to kind of follow up on that session. So just to give you a little bit of background about me. So my background is as a practitioner working in fashion design, and I've worked as a lecturer in contextual studies of fashion. I've worked in further education, higher education. I currently work at Montfort University and elsewhere, but I also do quite a lot of work out in the community, particularly and increasingly in prison learning. So I'm really interested in the idea of inclusion and the way that the kind of learning that I'm involved in, which is perhaps described as arts-based, multi-sensory, playful, all of those things, how that can actually offer a route into a more inclusive learning and teaching approach. I'm very much hands-on academic. I would definitely call myself a pracademic. And just to say, this photo here, which has me in it, is from the Playful Learning Conference, which was held in Leicester last year. So a little plug for you if you're interested in this kind of work. The Playful Learning Conference will be in Leicester again in July. So if you want to come and have some fun, then do come and join us for that. So some of you may already know lots about Lego Serious Play. Some of you may know nothing. So I'm just going to give you briefly a little bit of background into it. So it's not a new thing. It's been around for about 20 years, and it was developed by these two guys who were working with the Lego toy group. And the original concept came about as a way of coming up with new ideas for the company. They decided to start experimenting with the product, as in the Lego bricks, and eventually came up with this methodology. And I have got a reading list at the end of the slides, but there's a link here to an article which actually tells you exactly how the method was developed. And there's quite a lot of management theory in there, but it does also link into some pedagogic theory too. Over the past few years, Lego Serious Play has broadened out, and so it's not just used in businesses. Increasingly, it's used in education, and there's a publication that's just been published in its second edition about Lego Serious Play in higher education that I've actually contributed to. There's a link to that at the end of the slides. So it's something that seems to be growing. So some of you might be thinking, okay, but what actually is it? Oh, yes. Thank you. Somebody's experienced some Lego play. Yes, reflection is really, really central. And it's one of the things that I think is most powerful about Lego Serious Play. So thank you, Wayne, for sharing that. So if you don't know what it is, it's very hard to describe, but I'll do my best. I think there's a good, simple explanation in that publication that I mentioned, which is Lego for University Learning. So it's a series of challenges set as questions, a visual response, which is basically, I ask a question, you build a model, then you share the story. So those of you that were at the workshop will know, and it's done in a very staged and very structured way, a very scaffolded way. So you build up gradually into deeper and deeper discussion. You move from building an individual model to linking up and building a joint model. And then if you have time, you can start delving in, extracting all sorts of themes and connections. And yeah, depending on how much time you have, you can get quite a lot of outputs from that activity. And it's very versatile. You can apply it in lots and lots of different contexts. So simply put, I would say it's a tool for storytelling. So it's not necessarily about the Lego bricks themselves. It's more about what they enable you to do and what they enable you to talk about and think about that you wouldn't have done without building a Lego model. It's highly metaphorical. So you talk about something made of Lego, and instantly you'll find yourself talking about something that is much bigger than that Lego model, something that it symbolizes, something that it stands for. And your imagination will start to explore all of these different stories. It kind of just happens. So from its original kind of purpose, I think it was really about creative thinking, solving problems, thinking about shared goals, say for a business, and the sort of strategic direction. Um, so yes, I will come back to your questions as on comments too. But I'm more interested in the sort of social and emotional aspects of this method, which I think is why I think it's useful from an inclusive viewpoint. So, as has already been mentioned, it fosters reflection, absolutely, but it can also really enhance empathy. You can actually find out how the world looks from another point of view. And it's very good for getting to know yourself better and building confidence too. So, that's just a very, very brief snapshot of what Lego Serious Play is. So just very briefly to touch on a little bit of theory. Um, so constructivism is really key to Lego Serious Play, and I'm only going to mention it briefly. I could go on to talk about social constructivism, but constructivism being this idea that we're not all empty vessels and the knowledge is poured into the top of our heads, rather that we all construct our knowledge differently based on our own completely different experiences of the world, is really made concrete with Lego Serious Play, because Lego Serious Play externalizes your thinking. So you can see that someone else sees the world in a different way. Somebody else builds their knowledge differently. So just to use an example, there's an exercise with Lego Serious Play where you build ducks using 6 bricks, and you have these 6 bricks and you have so much time to build as many different ducks as you want. And I've done this with large groups of people and looked around the room, and hardly any of the ducks are the same. And I just find that mind blowing, really, because, you know, we're all conceptualizing this idea of a duck in a slightly different way. So I think it's really valuable to look at it from that constructivist lens. And linked to that, the idea of constructionism. So this is the idea that when we make something, we don't just make the thing, we build new knowledge. And this is really very much at the heart of Lego Serious Play. And David Gauntlet, who actually has produced the open source materials for Lego Serious Play, which you've got a link to at the end of this talk, he developed this idea further in his books, such as Making is Connecting, and talks about this idea of thinking with the hands. So when you take part in Lego Serious Play, you're trying to bypass this logical brain that's trying to analyze and overthink, and just get your hands in the bricks and start building. And bizarrely, something happens and comes out that you didn't actually expect to happen. It's quite interesting, quite counterintuitive initially too. So flow was already mentioned, and flow is really an important concept with Lego Serious Play. So as has already been mentioned, flow is about this sort of optimal level of challenge where we're completely absorbed by the task, where we're really committed to it. We're not too stressed, we're not too bored. And from that can come a really joyful feeling. So the job of the facilitator for Lego Serious Play is to try and get people into this flow state. So you're constantly trying to manage that, but the idea is that you will lose track of time and you won't be worrying about the marking you've got to do, what you're going to have for dinner. You're just very mindful and present in the present moment. And that is, I think, one of the things that I really like about this method, that it can get people very engaged. So back to inclusive learning. A little while ago, I took part with a colleague in some action research with some students because we knew that there were some really valuable elements to this method, but we wanted some data. We've written those up in an article here, which is to do with creative and contemplative pedagogy. And we looked at two methods, and one of those was Lego Serious Play. And this was using it in a transitions into university context. And this helped us to really think about why this method was helpful to make people feel part of a group, sense of belonging, that they had a voice, and so on and so on. So I'm just mentioning that article there because it is related to what I'm talking about. But some of the key things about the method of Lego Serious Play that I think mean that it can be part of an inclusive approach. I'm not saying that any one method is one size fits all, and that you can just say, right, I'm being inclusive because I'm using this. Absolutely not. It's much more nuanced than that. But I think there are some valuable aspects. And I think the first one about everyone having a voice, it's a very democratic method, I think is key. Also, because it is highly visual and kinesthetic and importantly, non-textual, I think that can be an asset to many learners and very accessible to many learners. Also, I think linked to that, it can offer a bridge in if students have anxieties about things like academic writing. Exercises with Lego Serious Play can help to get the thinking process and the words and keywords there to help you into an assignment. And then the social aspect, the sense of belonging, very quickly with Lego Serious Play. And I noticed this with colleagues in Staffordshire, some of whom I don't think knew one another before the session. Within a few minutes, everyone's chatting, everyone's talking and getting to know one another very quickly. One of the very important ground rules of Lego Serious Play is that when you build a model, it's yours and only you can say what it means. So this is part of trying to create some psychological safety within the group. Somebody else can't look at your model and start interpreting it and giving it meaning. So I think that can be quite a safe feeling for people who might feel uncomfortable about talking in a group. It's your model, whatever you say is what it means. Also, because you are talking through this mediating object of a model, I think that can also get over some of those anxieties about talking within a group that some learners may experience. Because even though you may well be talking about yourself, you're doing it through this vehicle of the model at one remove. And I think with group work, sometimes we will get a dominant member of the group who can take over. And with this method, because of the way it's very structured, it's very difficult for that to happen because everyone tends to have an equal chance of speaking. Mm-hmm. And similarly, quieter members of the group will be encouraged to actually contribute. in a way that feels hopefully quite comfortable and not too pressured. So I mentioned visual and kinesthetic learners. So I've done quite a lot of work with learners with dyslexia who have particularly welcomed this method because they don't have to write, and they're not the only ones who appreciate that. So if learners have a preference for the visual and kinesthetic, they can find this quite refreshing because academia is still quite text dominant. It can give them a break, it can give them a different way into learning that is quite welcomed by many. And linked to that, it can offer a way into writing. So just to give an example, I worked with a colleague in learning support on reflective writing, where we built a Lego model, talked about it, reflected on it, and then did some free writing based on that experience, just completely reflecting on that experience, which was then honed into a piece of finished writing. And it just can help overcome some of the anxieties and some of the barriers. Also, I have colleagues, for example, in Loughborough University, who use Lego Serious Play in one-to-ones, and students literally build the essay with Lego and model some of the barriers and some of the difficulties that they may be experiencing. And I think one of the very important aspects of this method is the social aspect. It's particularly useful for things like induction because people connect very quickly, and it can really help to foster that sense of belonging to a learning community. And I think because it is essentially quite a democratic process, I think it can really help with groups that are underrepresented to give them a voice and to be visible and seen as part of the wider community.